We have been talking quite a bit about AI, what it can do, the wonders and maybe the nightmares and the gadgets and all the wonderful things. And I think that it would be interesting to talk about how do these things, these technologies actually affect us human beings. And I think one topic that's very often overlooked when we talk about science and knowledge and technology is how they affect our culture, how they affect the way that we think, and thereby our behavior. And I think this is very essential in a way. And I think that we can we can look at AI as the last in a chain or a line of scientific and technological revolutions that are bringing us to a different way of viewing ourselves and a different way of being humans. And let's just start way back. Now, Copernicus was just mentioned. Think about the revolution that was brought about, the mental revolution that was brought about by kicking out the geocentric worldview. Actually realizing that Earth was not the center of the universe and the center of everything, it was just somewhere out there. The center of our solar system was actually the sun, and we were just revolving around the sun. That took, I mean, as you all know, people have been burned at the stake for, even implying this, and it was a major revolution in thinking. You could point to another kind of revolution that goes the same way. If you think about Darwin, what did Darwin do? He actually kicked human beings off their pedestal as something special compared to the rest of the living world. We used to be something really special, God's own creation, the only creation that had a soul, and so on and so forth. No, Darwin said, well, we're just another kind of animal, maybe a very complex animal, fine, but still we have the same ancestors as, all the other beings out there, come from some kind of microbe. That was another great mental revolution. And if you go out there in the world and count the people who believe in evolution, compare them to the people who believe in some kind of creation, I think the people who recognize evolution as where we come from are still a minority, in fact. So this is a revolution that is still going on in our thinking. And we're still getting used to that. Now, we are living through two other, I think, major developments or revolutions. You could talk about the neuroscience revolution and the genetics revolution. If you think about neuroscience, it used to be a field that was about figuring out, what is Alzheimer's, how can we cure Alzheimer's, what is Parkinson's, how can we cure it, so forth. But it sort of moved in the last couple of decades to trying to figure out what is human nature, what are the aspects of human nature, where are they lodged in the brain, how do they work, where is love, where is hate, where are different emotions and different cognitive functions in the brain, and how do they work? So working out the mechanics of who we are. And in effect, what that entails is not just a lot of interesting knowledge about the brain, it actually changes the way that we think about ourselves. We used to think, going back a few decades, that we might have a soul, or we might have a psyche, or something that was immaterial, couldn't maybe just be reduced to what is going on in brain tissue. And we were certainly still kind of different from the animals, and that we had consciousness, and that's probably a different property that's only human. But now it's becoming very clear with brain science and the knowledge that comes from those sciences that no, each of us, we are our brains. We don't have anything else going on than what is going on in our brains. It's also becoming very clear that we don't even have an essential self. There is no real you in there. We used to talk about finding yourself. No, there isn't any yourself in there. It depends on your brain state. You are your brain state. If you change the state of your brain, you become a different person. And we all know that from if you've taken drugs, or if you know somebody who's taken drugs, or if you have seen somebody succumb to dementia. People become different when their brains become different. And that is, I think, beginning to really sink into our culture. And so what does that entail? It tells us, well, if there is no real me in there, if I am my brain state, and a brain state is something that can be, it's malleable, it can be shaped by different drugs, by what we eat, by cognitive technologies like doing meditation. Meditation is changing your brain. Everybody who have tried mindfulness to be more effective at their work or whatever they try it for, they know that they are changing themselves with this technology that is actually shaping and forming their brain differently. So it has become, in just, let's say, a decade, much more normal to find it absolutely natural that, if there's something you want to change about yourself, your inner being, you seek out the technologies to do it. If you go to any American college, a lot of the students will naturally take different cognitive enhancers when they take exams or do projects or whatever. And that was just, a decade ago or 15 years ago, if you asked an ethicist, bioethicist about this, they would say, that's a no-go. It's okay to try to treat diseases and abnormalities of the brain. It is not ethically okay to enhance your natural abilities. Now, if you go and read bioethicists, they will all say that, of course, that's a perfectly, or most of them will say that's perfectly okay, since we, it's all about, what are the advantages, what are the downsides, and if we don't have too many side effects, it's fine. Because what for human beings, what is it we've always tried to do for all our, as far as we can look back, we have tried to better ourselves in some ways. If it's by reading books or being educated or whatever, we try to better ourselves. So why not use great new technologies? And these great new technologies are, of course, being developed. And I think we will come to use them much more than we do. You could talk about genetics in the same way. Genetics has entered a new stage as we have seen personal genomics become reality. It's what I would call biology's parallel to the computer revolution. Computers used to be huge machines for only big companies or academic institutions. Now, computers are everywhere, ubiquitous. We can't even imagine existing without computers in everything. Genomics used to be for specialized scientists who could work with maybe one, maybe two genes at a time. Now, of course, it's cheap to sequence genetic material. We can, all get our genomic information. That is beginning to tell us much more about why is one human different from another. So in fact, it's another sort of step in the understanding of our mechanics. Why is it that I, for example, am very prone to stress? Well, I can point to various genetic variations that I carry around that, will predispose you to stress. And I can even explain why, because the way they affect some of the areas of my brain, and so on and so forth. And you could do that with a lot of other genes and look at a lot of other people and their genetics and say, well, we can understand ourselves much better in mechanical terms, so to speak. So we are becoming this organism. We are understanding ourselves as organisms. And I think if you take AI and place it as the sort of the latest new technology, what is AI? How is that going to change our thinking about ourselves? I think it will sort of finalize things in a way. It will become very clear to us that yes, we are biology, but we are in fact also machines. We are a piece of biological machinery. Because when you look at what AI has told us so far, is pretty much that our behavior is so predictable. we may walk around, each of us, thinking that we are a unique entity, this wonderful being, ineffable, difficult to understand, and we have, maybe some of you even think you have free will, and that you can do whatever you want, and that you have, agency and all this stuff. But when we use data mining, we use AI and look at what do people do, it becomes so easy to predict what every one of us is actually going to do. And I think the more that we use AI, the more this is becoming apparent. And we will become even more, we will really think of ourselves as these biological machines and understand ourselves in those terms. And what is that going to mean? That's going to mean, in the longer term, that yes, using tools from AI and using tools from biotechnology and from neuroscience and wherever you can find them to shape human beings, to make them different, to change their behavior, whatever, it will become part and parcel of what we do as individuals and in society. If we look then at the shorter term, I think it's interesting because, as Robert mentioned, it might look very different for us in, let's say, 50 years. And at that point, we will, of course, all the older people with hang-ups about this will have died off. So we will have all these human beings that have been born into this culture of biotech and AI and understanding yourself as biological machinery. And that might be quite harmonious, we don't know. But until then, I think we are really heading for trouble, as you said. We're looking into a time when we're trying to come to terms with this different way of thinking and also come to terms just with an AI technology that really is exploding in our hands, and that we've seen from all these talks that we know very little about what is going on, where it's going on, and we're trying to regulate it in some places and in other places not. And it's going to be used, I think, very differently in different cultures. It's going to mean different things. But let's just start with what we were talking about when Misha got to the point of, well, having all this nice AI, we can of course humanize work, and we can work less, and we can work with the stuff that is creative and what we want to do, and all the shitty jobs will disappear. I think that is becoming, that will become a problem, because you can't just take people and say, well, you don't have to work, you don't have to do anything, or the jobs that will be there will only be the super creative, interesting jobs that machines aren't doing. Well, that means, if you take that literally, that there will only be very, very, very few humans who can, who can do those jobs. It might be that it will be a great time for the very few, very creative people who can, take all of this technology and use it to augment their own great abilities and come up with things that the machines on their own couldn't come up with. So what we heard about. But what about everybody else? I think a lot of everybody else will be, at least in the Western world, sort of enveloped in the kind of AI that we heard about yesterday, the kind of AI that sort of gives you everything you want even before you ask for it. So you have your phone and it makes you, go to this place or go to that place, and it optimizes what you see and what you hear to your tastes. I mean, for me, that sounds exactly like Brave New World and Soma. The most people will be enveloped in this kind of nice AI padding that will keep them satisfied. And I don't know whether that will keep everyone satisfied. I'm sure that we will have pockets of people who will, rebel against this kind of thing and say, well, I want to stay off the grid. I don't want to give my data out anywhere. I don't want to participate in this. And we will have these little islands of people living out in the woods, so to speak, in a way, trying to live off the grid. I also think we have to look at not just our society, because we have been discussing this and talking about this in mostly, you could say, a Western or maybe even a European context. But look at the political situation in some parts of the world. I mean, AI have been probably aiding, as we were talking about yesterday at dinner, some of us, in Turkey you have a political situation where you're moving away from democracy, where governments can, suddenly use data from social media to pick out people who are against the government and basically intern them or forbid them to go out of the country. You could point to a country like China and see what's going on there. They have big plans for, of course, using AI for controlling the whole population, or not controlling is not what they say, but having a system put in place where you have surveillance everywhere, you have data from people going into central government-controlled systems, and what happens is that you can start giving out points to your citizens. Are you a good citizen in this area, or are you not a good citizen in this area, and what's going to happen? And you're already seeing these weird developments where some places in China you have points being given or minus points being given to people who are not paying their debts, for example. So when you call one of these people up on the phone, you can't get to them before you listen to a message that this person is not a good payer. He is not keeping up his payments on his car or whatever it is. And in other places you could, it could be points for not being a good parent, not being this, not being that. And I'm sure that that's gonna be rolled out in a much bigger context. And it's, as we were speaking about, when the economic situation may change and China becomes this great big economic juggernaut, is that culture going to be rolled out somewhere else as well? I think there are tons of questions in this that will, that we should talk a lot more about. And I think when we were talking in that little group earlier on about Europe's role, because as one gentleman said, it was very, very scary to see Harold's little slide about where are these developments going on. Europe is like this tiny little dot. You have the US in AI and social media, and you have China over here, Asia, and Europe is like this speck. And what are we going to do here? Maybe we could become a place where we start thinking about, with all these technologies at our fingertips, with all these possibilities, good and bad, could we be this kind of think tank for the world of how do we use these possibilities for the good, or what do we even think is good? What is the good life in the future? What are the values that we want to build on? Because of course, when you have huge possibilities, you also have huge potential downsides. And I think we should, as somebody said, we should all become much more political and think about what on earth are we going to do with this. And just all we've heard about, for example, with healthcare, every little issue that you go into, financial services, healthcare, whatever, it becomes apparent that we need to think about who is it going to be rolled out to, all these wonderful possibilities. Who is going to miss out? Is it all about making money for companies, or is it also about creating a world that will be worth living in for most people and not just for, the elite, like the groups here? And I think with that very positive, I'll end on that very positive note and give the word over to you.